This should be a fun one. Since the day I told anyone I was coming to Reveal, and maybe this is a good time as any to kick it off, I had no fewer than 20 people say, so when are you and George going to do the eDiscovery Odd Couple? Because personality-wise, we kind of are two ends of the opposite end of the spectrum, but in terms of passion for education and for eDiscovery, we actually couldn't be more similar. So we thought, why not kick off this hopefully series of discussions about all things eDiscovery with myself, Kat Casey, and of course, the godfather of eDiscovery himself, Mr. George Sosha. Do you want to introduce yourself to the crowd, even though I don't think it's necessary?
Well, if we're going to be an odd couple, you should keep doing all the talking and I should be silent, because that's the default mode for the two of us. You, the extrovert, and me, very much the introvert. A little bit of background in case people don't know, because they don't necessarily. I spent a decade and a half as a practicing lawyer, then a decade and a half as a consultant and expert witness. Along the way, this part people know, co-creating EDRM. Gotten a bunch of awards over the years for innovation, which is kind of cool. I won't bore people with the list. And have spoken on everything from, information governance well before trial, all the way through presentations at appeal to venues around the world, and as well on tiny screens like this one.
Well, and I think for anyone joining the call, there is something we do have to clear up. Between us, which one is the one that got in the low-speed motorcycle chase in Africa?
Might have been me.
But no, George is...
But I could go into that story, but it requires too much time to set the context properly. So if people want to know what in the world you are alluding to, they're just going to have to contact me separately to find out.
You heard it here first. If you want to hear about motorcycle chases in Africa, Mr. Sosha. Well, and for those of you that don't know me, George is right. I'm a little bit of an extrovert. I'm kind of one of the talking heads of eDiscovery. I've been everywhere from the Big Four to running global eDiscovery programs. And now I work closely with George, talking about all things AI and legal tech and all the awesome stuff going on at Reveal. And so one of the things we thought would be really cool to do is we've kind of come to this place where we're both sitting on the same screen with the same blue background on very different winding paths. And 10, 15, 20 years ago, we each probably had different ideas on where the industry would be today. And so one of the things we thought would be really interesting is to talk about, what kind of, given our different backgrounds, what surprises us about the eDiscovery industry today? What has us scratching our head? Because I think for a lot of us, especially those that have been in the space for a decade or 2 decades, it's been a wild ride and not necessarily one along the path we would have expected.
So in preparation for that, I thought I would go dig up some of my predictions from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Thankfully, in the short period of time I spent researching this yesterday, I ran across nothing. So I couldn't find anything to totally embarrass myself with that way. But as I think back to the various predictions over the years, what actually surprises me most, and I think this is not what folks are expecting, isn't how far we still have to go, but how far we've come, especially in the last few years. It feels, everyone is familiar with the hockey stick curve, and it feels like for years and years and years, we have just been inching along the lower part of that hockey stick. And now just in the last few years, we're starting to shoot up. So I've got really, really high hopes for what we're going to see moving forward in the next, 3, 5 years, or even next 3, 5 months.
Well, as a surprise to no one, I kind of have a different view on it. Like I can remember 2009 or 10 talking with Judge Andy Peck. It was right on the heels of DeSilva Moore, and I just thought this tech, this AI is so much better than the banker boxes and paper cuts and manual bait stamps. I bet you in 1, 2, or 3 years, every case is going to use TAR. Every case is going to use AI. And I've been shocked at both how slow the adoption of that initial tech was, but at the same time, how much the innovation then leapfrogged that earlier tech. And so it's sort of a double-edged sword. And I have a feeling, I've said it probably to a lot of the folks on here, it feels today, after kind of waiting and waiting and waiting, like we're on a roller coaster. Like it's that first big drop and you're going up and you can kind of feel it clicking as you're about to go over the edge. That's sort of how it feels going into 2022. And so I'm optimistic, but also floored. It's taken 15 years, or I guess 12 years to get to this point. I don't know. One of the other things we kind of wanted to dig into is, predictions. We're kind of coming up on the end of the year. It's sort of standard fare. Everyone, wheels out their thoughts on the year that's closing and the year to come, but kind of in kind of homage to that unique path each of us took, we thought, what would be an interesting prediction that a younger you would have had, before AI hit the stage, maybe when paper was still what you were dealing with. I will admit your younger you might have been a few years earlier than my younger you, but I think it could still be interesting.
So let's just roll the clock back to, say, if we want to do it that way, 1989. So I've been practicing for just a couple of years at that point. Staples on my desk were a Bates stamp, the magnifying glass, a highlighter, yellow pad, and all of that. But I also, by that point, had brought into the office my old first edition, if you will, Apple Macintosh, first month of production. And I was using that to build extensive witness books, tracking information on about 160 witnesses for a set of cases I was working on, and a chronology that spanned the better part of two centuries.
Wow.
And at that point, I was thinking, wouldn't it be incredible if there were some set of tools available to make it a lot easier than working with that Mac, which didn't even have internal storage, data storage, and capabilities that extended on beyond what was basically just a rudimentary word processing tool. But then I thought, yeah, well, nice to dream, and not much. So at that point, my predictions about where we would have gone would have been much more modest. Email was still something rarely used by lawyers or their clients, for that matter. I had only been introduced to it a few years before, when my brothers who were in graduate school, each of them were communicating cross-country with this weird thing called email. So there were only a few people even thinking about what we do to now. I couldn't even, I didn't have the tools at that point to even imagine where we would be in terms of the capabilities we have now. So whatever prediction I might have had from them, it would have been totally, absolutely wrong.
Well, the funny thing is, I mean, my early years were a little further along than that. We did have, the federal rules were amended. Email was part of, information that was potentially discoverable. But I still thought we would have 500 people, like on the Intel AMD case, in a warehouse out in the suburbs, billing 100 hours a week, and that it would be manual. And so I don't think the AI or the cloud nature of remote review, none of that really was even on my mind. I think what's always interesting is when you make a prediction, it's what you don't know to even imagine that ends up being the biggest shift down the road. And, that kind of leads into, looking at 2022, what do you think is going to be the next big thing? I know you and I were talking about it earlier, and some of the things that came up were, more adoption and actual use of AI or cloud computing. But, what do you think the next 12 months holds, let alone the next, 72?
Yeah, I think this one is no surprise. Easily predicted, hardly even worth calling a prediction, but I think it's going to be the biggest driving factor, which is the myriad of things that we will be able to accomplish using AI and various platforms and systems in this coming year. Just look at how much things have changed in the last couple of years with AI. So much more is going to change. The other thing I think is a safe bet as a prediction is that we are going to have much more, well before the end of 2022, We are going to have much more robust tools and protocols available to handle the broader array of content we now need to work with as we try to figure out who is communicating with whom about what, when, where, why, and how, so that we can pull together in one place when we're working with things for investigations and lawsuits, pull together in one place, email messages, chat messages, Slack messages, you name it, and follow those threads of communications across platforms. Today, that's a really difficult thing to accomplish. By this point next year, it should be very straightforward to achieve. That's the prediction I'll throw out there. I think it's a safe one.
Okay. Well, I think if we were talking about just that point last year, we would have said atypical data is much more important and you've got to be able to follow across all those paths. I think 2022, the realization is that's now typical data. And so the tools have to catch up to meet all the different ways we communicate. This morning, I sent a text message, I had a Slack message, I looked at a voicemail, I was on social media, then I went to a WhatsApp, then I thought, oh, I need to go shower, that's before I even got out of bed. And so it's, I think out of necessity, we're going to have to innovate there. Another question, aside from when are you doing eDiscovery Odd Couple, that I got a lot of is, why reveal and why now? And I talked with George a little bit about this. For me, one of the first things that caught my eye was actually, frankly, him coming here. And you have someone who's got such a breadth of experience and just kind of foundational to the development of eDiscovery. When they move somewhere, you kind of keep an eye, but it wasn't just that. It was the types of tech they were bringing in, not just the best, AI and models, but the best visualization. And the timing was right. For me, it felt like there was an appetite to move away from pure consolidation. And those were kind of the things that caught my eye, but I was later to the game. George saw this pattern earlier. And so one thing I'm sure folks on here want to know is like, why, I guess 2 years ago or 18 months ago, did you say, hey, Reveal's the place for me? Because I think you were ahead of the curve there for certain.
Well, you got to do something fun mid-pandemic, right? But probably what was the bigger set of drivers, really, I've had 3 times during my career where I've taken anywhere from 4 to 6 months to figure out, okay, now what next?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I want to go? What do I want to be doing? What should it look like? What should it be? And this time my focus was very much, I want to find a place within a company that develops software for eDiscovery. Mm-hmm. For eDiscovery, I know there have been plenty of people who have said, eDiscovery is dead, go do something else, go into privacy, go into something else. I don't care. Maybe it's true. Maybe eDiscovery is dead. I don't think so. But it's where my focus and my interest is. So I wanted to stay within that world, the world of eDiscovery. That's also where I think I've got the most to offer. Mm-hmm. Software, because as I look at what we all need to accomplish, in order to achieve what we're going to need to do, what we need to do today, the only way we are getting there is with better and better software to accomplish those tasks. Of course, we continue to need bodies working on projects. We need people who can manage projects effectively. We need service providers, large and small, who can run those projects, as well as law firms who either run them internally or turn to those service providers. Done my stint in law firms, 16 years. Mm-hmm. Done my stint the previous 4 years in a large service provider. I thought the place where I could I could have the greatest positive impact, and B, where I could have the best time, was the software side. Then that goes to the question of where. And as with so many things in life, the timing just happened to be right. I contacted Wendell, who's our CEO, right at about the time that I think he had decided, hey, we need someone like George in a role here. So once I contacted him, things moved forward very quickly.
Well, and you would not necessarily talk to Wendell, because once you talk to him, it's really hard not to get psyched.
But then why Reveal? Because Reveal was, a year ago, before the NextLP acquisition, before the merger with BrainSpace, Reveal did not have the same attention it does now. But what I saw in Reveal was a world of possibilities. An organization poised to be able to move in potentially great directions, an organization still of a size and structure where I would have a chance to make a good, strong, positive impact, an organization with people I knew I would enjoy working with, and where I either knew or learned right after I joined or right before the announcement went out that I was going to have some great colleagues. So that, for example, this is for me a chance to work under the same organizational umbrella with Jay Lee, with whom I've worked with for a decade or more, but always on things like EDRM projects and never side by side in an organization. So for a variety of reasons, Reveal, where the technology is poised to go, the culture of the organization, the people to work with, working within an organization. I've spent 13 years working on my own, and there's a lot to be said for working on your own, but the one thing you do not have when you are on your own, by definition, is work colleagues. It can get a bit lonely, even for an introvert like me.
Well, and for I would say ambivert, because I'm a recovering introvert. You might not believe that. Same thing. Having smart people that you can learn from and work with, it levels you up. And I think the other thing, when I look at the why Reveal, it actually has to do with the larger market. I don't know if I would have made the leap 5 years ago, because I don't think the market was ready to look at other tools and look at other solutions and look at anything aside from kind of the default stack of tech they were using. Having been at Gibson a couple years ago and then at another company, I sort of saw a wholesale shift that I hadn't seen probably since the mass consolidation around one technology in 0607. It's sort of the reverse of that, a appetite for choice and choose your own adventure. And the fact that Reveal had, on-prem and cloud, had both the NextLP and the BrainSpace by the time I came on, and a robust platform, like that combination made it a much more scalable leap from legacy to next gen. And because of that, in the market climate like this, where people have older cases and newer cases and are evaluating a shift, it felt like the right company to help the legal tech industry move into the next chapter with, if that makes sense. So, you've been in a little longer than me, and I've got about 6 months under my belt. Having made the leap from a big consultancy, or in my case, from another tech company, into Reveal, what surprised you most? What was the, oh my goodness, this was my expectation, but the reality is a little bit different? What was the aha for you?
I'll answer the question slightly differently than asked.
Okay, fine.
Because it's always fun to do it that way, right? So right before I joined, Reveal acquired NextLP, now Reveal AI. And I forget who I was having the discussion with internally, but I said, I know this would never happen, but wouldn't it be incredible?
Oh, yeah.
We're also able to add BrainSpace to the fold, because think how amazing that would be. And think of the opportunities and possibilities that would create. Well, that of course has happened. The thing that I didn't necessarily expect, the thing that I have very much enjoyed, is part of what I do that's not public facing. And it's not that I'm doing it that would have been a surprise or not expected, but the
Opportunity?
I'd say the richness of the thought processes, what people are doing, the things they're developing, the way they're developing them, as everyone on the product team looks to figure out, where do we go next? And I now have a much better appreciation a year plus in of what software development entails. I mean, I've had my own small efforts and initiatives over the years, which haven't especially gone very far. Some of them have, some haven't when it comes to software development. This is a completely different scale. So everything from the initial brainstorming through the so-called wireframes, which are much, much more robust than any wireframes I ever worked with in the past, through the sprints to develop and implement the capabilities. I have found that to be a more rewarding process to participate than I had anticipated, and I was looking forward to it.
I've found that fascinating, but again, you and I are wired a little differently. What also I found super fascinating is the openness to suggestions, even like suggesting brain space when they already had an XLP, that aren't mainstream, like the willingness to investigate something and to dig in and then put all that due diligence in to see if it works. Because I think a lot of times decisions are kind of made, articulated, and kind of boiled down, and then you do the due diligence to see if it works. Here, it's been much more, people from the newest people on the dev team to you and I, to Jay, to people with a lot of different backgrounds. We're all kind of being brought in. What do you think about this? What do you think about expanding here or doing this or acquiring that? And I think that openness isn't something that I had seen in a lot of organizations. It tends to be a little bit more top down. And I think that collaboration and outside the box thinking is sort of how you end up with going from, 2 years ago, who was Reveal, to Reveal. Of course, we're talking about them because they're doing all this great stuff. I think the other thing that surprised me is I like the people. I have literally worked in every place you can work, every type of place you can work. I've been on the staffing side, I've been the big four, I've run a program, I've been on the software side, I've been on the eDiscovery vendor side. And, it's a lot of Wild West, it's a lot of big personalities, but it's never, for me, been an experience where every single person I'm working with, I actually like them. It's sort of the, beer and a puppy test. Would I give them my puppy to babysit? And for me, that's a very high bar. Or would I, grab a beer or a glass of wine with them? And I can't think of.
You've got a puppy to get them. You've got a puppy.
I have 3. Yeah. I have a one-eyed pirate pug, a Frenchie, and a little new Frenchie. So the bar is very high, but it's when I look at our team, and that's, the extended team, that's the executive team, that's our innovation team. I haven't met anyone where I'm like, no puppy for you. That's kind of refreshing.
In a culture, and just as in the early days of the internet, it was said that content is king. I think for organizations, culture is king. I mean, if you don't have a solid, strong, positive culture, that's really challenging to overcome. And if you do have that, there's a lot you can accomplish pulling together to get you across the gaps otherwise you couldn't span. So yeah, that's so critical. From my perspective, it's almost a given, but it's still very important to talk about.
Well, I think that kind of bleeds into one of the other, topics we had, played around with. What do you think is driving this FOMO for so many great people to join? I mean, I count myself in the great people because I might have a tish of an ego, but like every time I see a new hire, I'm like, oh, they have such a cool background. They came from this company. Why are they coming here? What's going on? And like, I know why I came here, but what do you think is driving I like to call it, the FOMO, but the appetite. So
I'm going to pause because the most important thing is not.
Oh, I see a question.
But there's a question. Now, so I'll read it out loud. I'll give as much of a response as I think is appropriate. So here's the question or comment. Having the powerful processing tools Reveal has in the stack is amazing. Great, thanks, kudos. Are there tool discussions being discussed regarding the early collection process? A preservation library to process data artifacts from, for example. So I think the most it's appropriate for me to say is, of course, we are looking at things like that. And then I'm going to follow that up with, we very much welcome and value any thoughts or suggestions along these or other lines. So Dave, if you got more details about what you're looking for, send them to us. You can email me, George or GSOCHA @revealdata.com. You can send them to Kat, doesn't matter, get them to us. We'll make sure people pay attention to them.
That kind of bleeds into the thinking outside the box thing. We've had clients say, hey, look at this tech, and we do. The cool thing is no idea is too outside the box for us to give it merit, listen to it, and sort of see if it's got some legs. So if you have ideas, I want all of them. We're like a sponge.
And John put up my email address in the chat box. Thanks, John.
All right, well, going back to FOMO, because that's where I like to live. Aside from like what we had talked about, which is, good culture and, the types of acquisitions that are happening, what do you think is driving this movement of folks from, the biggest players in the industry to Reveal, who maybe even 2 years ago wouldn't have even been on their radar?
So I'll do a slight digression first. FOMO isn't, fear of missing out. I don't think I think of it so much in those terms. No, because
fear of missing the opportunity, excitement, interest, fascination. It's a blanket term.
Yeah. So we could go a long way with that, but let me focus on the real part here. The real question: why are we getting the great people we're getting? I think it's a lot of the same type of things as motivated you and motivated me. We're as Wendell likes to say, we're on the Reveal rocket ship right now, and this is an organization that very much has a feel of a place going places, and who doesn't want to be at a place like that? I'd much rather be on the rocket ship than on the slow boat for something like this.
Or the rocket ship that hasn't reached escape velocity and is crashing back towards the Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd much rather be in a place, for me, and I think this is a common theme with the people who have joined Reveal, but for me, I'd much rather be working someplace that's going somewhere than a place that is in stasis, sort of not a holding pattern, but rather reached somewhere, hit a certain level of maturity. I personally don't do well in that latter type of organization. Other people do. It's not like one is necessarily inherently better than the other, but I'm not so good in that latter situation. Much better for me when things are being built and when things are being maintained.
I like to build the plane. When it's flying it on autopilot, I get less interested. I can feel that. I also think, in parallel with the culture of people you like, there's also, I call it like a co-opetition. Like, we're cooperative and collaborative, but competitive. We want to make everything better. And so it sort of forces us to level up in a friendly way. It's not a zero-sum game, which I think is a little unusual for this industry and a little refreshing. We are at the 2-minute mark, so I don't know if anyone in the audience has any questions. Hey, Patrick, good to see you. If not, we did have one other thought to close with, but maybe we just move to kind of closing remarks, give ourselves a minute each if no one else has any burning questions. And if you guys like this, and let us know, we may have to just do a part 2 early in the year. So, George, closing thoughts?
Why don't you go first?
Well, I'm just really excited. It's really... it's invigorating to be somewhere that forces you as a professional to grow, that you see shifting the industry and shifting what clients expect. I think for a long time, you had a menu with 2 items on it, and you were told to smile and buy it and pay 15% more per year. And it's really nice to say, oh, no, hold on a second. You have all this choice. Let me walk through it with you. Tell me what you need. If we don't have it, we'll build it. And for me, that's beyond exciting, especially as someone who used to get the 2-item menu and be very frustrated. So, George?
So for me, I'll just sum it up. I'm a kid in a candy shop here. It's great for me. One thing I would suggest, for those of you who do want to see a part 2, for part 1, Kat and I just brainstormed, what should we talk about? We had a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items. We've hit them all. But it doesn't need to be limited to what we think about. Send us your thoughts and suggestions, and we'll do what we can with them.
And we see you, Drew. AI
Yeah.
case studies, that's on our list.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. This was a quick sprint, and I think that I enjoyed it, which means I'm going to force you guys to listen to it again sometime soon. But send us any ideas. You have our email. If not, check us out on LinkedIn. eDiscovery Odd Couple, I think, is here for a while, and I enjoyed it. I don't know. You too, George?
Absolutely.
All right,
Thank you
well,
all.
thank you, guys. Be well.